one of the things I got really interested in was the barren lands. So up in the high Arctic where there's no trees, and I've done 3 trips out there, each of between 7 and 8 weeks long. The longest being the Back River, which we paddled a group of 6 of us, and it was about 1,000 kilometers, about 56 days or so, and that was it was a pretty amazing adventure because it's just a big wild river, one of the biggest wild rivers probably in North America that has, there's really no human disturbance on it. There's no dams, there's no human habitation. There's all kinds of archaeological evidence of former human habitation from the Inuit people. So you'd find tent rings or stone arrowheads or fish traps or, inuksuks, all kinds of things. But it's just a big, huge, wild space. And, we had all these amazing wildlife encounters with wolves and thousands of caribou and grizzly bears and all kinds of things. So it was a huge adventure.
Wow. And that's the Back
and
River,
yeah,
B-A-C-K?
B-A-C-K, yeah.
In Nunavut?
Yeah, I think it's almost entirely in Nunavut. Maybe the headwaters are in the Northwest Territories, but I think it's almost entirely in Nunavut. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Tell me, let's hear more about that trip. So there were 6 of you, 56 days. Did you do any like food drops, or you brought everything with you?
No, we brought everything with us. So that's an interesting one because, doing a food drop up there, you're so far from any float plane base that it would just be exorbitantly expensive. And there's also something magical about not having any support, and that you kind of, James Raffin talks about sort of like the magic middle of the trip when you're far enough away from the start that you're not thinking of like the beginning logistics anymore, and you're far enough away from the end that you're just sort of lost in the middle. And so the longer you can go without a food drop, in this case, you can be completely self-supported. You're lost in that magic middle where you're just this unit of 6 people working together, exploring together, which to me is the biggest part, just this exploration of this big wild place. And so we had all our food with us, but for 6 people for 56 days, that's a heck of a lot of food, right?
Yeah.
And so some of our packs, like we had this one pack that had all our bulk food items, like, flour, cornmeal, sugar, those sorts of things. And it was so heavy. We named the pack Blueberry Pie for some reason. All our packs had names. And it was so heavy at the start of the trip that we would sometimes take, like, just to be cautious and not throw out anybody's back, we would get 2 or 3 people to lift it when we had to put it in the boat.
Yeah.
Because it was so heavy, right? And we didn't want anybody to throw out a boat or throw out their back. And we didn't have any portages for 2 weeks. So we tried to like eat our way through it so we could lighten it up. But yeah, we didn't have any food drops at all.
What's the river itself like? Like what's the nature of, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we actually started a tributary called the Bailey River, and it's an amazing river. I mean, we were there just after, I think there'd been like a really interesting spring break up there that year. There must have been an ice dam somewhere because all these giant, like literally Volkswagen sized chunks of ice had floated up on land, and there was huge chunks of ice all over the place. And the water was still pretty high. So, there were some rapids that were considerable, only in that the water was really, really cold. There was ice everywhere. And, there were some really good standing waves, but it's not terribly technical. So it's mostly like this joyful ride through this amazing place. But as you get further down the Back River, at one point it flattens out and there's some giant lakes that you have to cross. And when we got there, it must have been towards the end of July. And as we looked across, something just on the horizon looked wrong. And this big lake was completely frozen. And so we had to, haul our boats up on the ice and figure out sort of like the best way to travel across the ice. Do you push a boat? Do you pull it? If you pull it, how do you do it? And so, we figured out if you need a certain length of rope to get the right angle, to get the right sort of leverage against the boat. And you had to really be careful where you walk because some of the ice was rotting. And so some of we figured out, there was a difference between the ice was kind of white versus black versus blue. Some of it was almost springy, as if you were standing on a trampoline a little bit. So you try to avoid that. And then you'd walk on sort of the more firm ice. And then when ice got really sketchy, you'd run back and you'd grab the gunnels and push yourself along that way, such that if you fell through, you'd have your own support.
Yeah.
And we figured out the system and managed to do it safely. But to answer your question more, so you start in this nice sort of joyride down the Bailey River, and then it flattens out a bit, and then after the lakes, that's when the back river really kind of hits its stride. You get some really, really big rapids where you're scouting from shore and you're looking at the main channel and you think, geez, that looks pretty hairy. We should probably take this other sort of side channel. And because the main channel is so big, it makes the side channel look totally manageable and doable. Then you get out there and you're like smashing through these giant standing waves and there's boulders everywhere. But when you're scouting it, from up high on a hill, it looked totally manageable just by comparison. So there's some really strong currents and pretty demanding water out there. And it's all in a really it's all in a wilderness context, right? Like if you get into trouble, you're a long way from help. So that makes the character of the river really, really interesting. Yeah.
Cool. And you said there were huge caribou herds that you encountered?
Oh yeah, and that was a highlight for me. I mean, as a biologist, I'm fascinated by wildlife, and one of the reasons that, excuse me, that I wanted to go to the Barrenlands in the first place was that I was just dying to see a caribou migration. It's like this fabled natural spectacle that.
And you got it.
I just thought it'd be an amazing thing. And so we'd seen a few caribou here and there as we're paddling down. And then one day we came around a corner. I'm like, oh guys, look, there's a caribou. Oh, there's 2, there's 10, there's 5, there's 50. I'm like, oh wait. And then all of a sudden you just saw like the landscape just started moving, and it was almost like when you're sitting in a parking lot and you're parked, but then the car beside you moves, right. And then you feel like you're moving because everything just shifted and the whole landscape just started moving. And there was just like, I can't tell you how many animals there were, but there was thousands. And the whole edge of the river was ringed with like a big mat of caribou hair from where they've been swimming across the river, and where you looked like the banks and everywhere you looked, there was just a quagmire of tracks. And it was just this wondrous thing to get to witness this spectacle. And we got really lucky that we bumped into herds maybe 4 times as we paddled down the river. And it was really breathtaking. And then of course, when there's caribou, there's wolves, right? So the wolves would be hot on their heels. And so we'd see these wolves sort of chasing the caribou or spreading them around at least. And you'd see, the males with the giant antlers and the female caribou have antlers too. But then you'd see the young calves of the year sort of running around on their springy legs. And so it was just a fascinating thing to watch in the middle of this canoe trip, right?
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Amazing.